Well, thank you very much for the three illuminating talks. We still have something like 15 minutes. We'll open the floor for questions. Okay.
Professor Salzberger, a question, or any of the other speakers. Can you define a migrant versus a refugee? Are they the same? Are they different? And then a question for Dr. Wolf. Does the EU have a chart, an assessment of the different nationalities that have entered into Europe among the 15 million that we heard from Professor Salzberger? In other words, how many Syrians, how many Afghans, how many North Africans, and what nations are North African, and so forth? That kind of an assessment. Thank you.
Okay, please.
Hello, thank you for the
Just a moment for the microphone.
Hello, and thank you for the presentations. I'm Dr. Tal Dingot from the Hebrew University, Department of International Relations. I have a remark and a question to Dr. Sarah Wolf. The remark is, you talked about the EU NAVFOR Med, which is an operation that the EU is leading since May 2015. And your critique towards the operation is that it is too focused, in terms of how to help refugees. And you mentioned the second phase of the operation, Sophia operation. And I want to even more challenge the operation, because Sophia operation is only the second phase, and the third phase, which was not a mandate by the UN Security Council, is about how to dissolve smugglers' vessels in Libya territorial water, which is even more challenging in terms of the humanitarian logic. So this is the remark. The question is, if the idea of normative power Europe haven't worked or didn't succeed during the 90s, when we still had hope, how do you see its strength nowadays when radical Islam is erupting and strengthening in the Middle East and in Africa, and Europe is handling the refugee crisis and all sorts of security issues as well? This is the second question. Thanks.
That's okay. Please.
Okay, thank you. My name is Haptom. I have just one question, and also Europe is not only obsessed with security, but also sometimes they try to engage with different countries and give assistance to prevent refugees. For example, they gave 200 million euro to Eritrea, which is one Eritrea every 7 asylum seekers getting to Europe, and giving 200 million to the dictatorship in Eritrea actually brings more refugees to Europe, not prevent it. And this is what, in fact, the policy was. They didn't consider the European Parliament decision. They followed. So somehow also the economic interest sometimes overpasses those crises, the human crisis. So I think the external relationship approach exists, but they do it very wrongly. I think that's my conclusion. I don't know what your conclusion is, but the question is this extra-territorial thing. Like they're going to try it in Turkey. They tried it in Libya. They tried it I think in Morocco. I think it didn't work, and I don't know how it will work. Also in Ethiopia, there was a refugee in Ethiopia for Eritreans, and this camps didn't work because it was not serious. They didn't do it seriously to prevent or to help this humanitarian crisis, but to prevent them from not coming. So these countries, Ethiopia, for example, cannot handle all these Eritreans coming to Ethiopia. So they can bring them for some time and allow them to go, because that's what they have to do. So I don't know how it will work today in Turkey, And how would it work for Turkey? Because Turkey will not, at the end of the day, will accumulate all the Syrian refugees in its borders. I don't. So this is my question.
Okay. I guess, is there, okay, one more question.
Really short and follows up on this, follows up on the last question. I'm interested, basically from everybody, about try to think together about what are going to be these long-term consequences of this European model, the Turkish deal being attempted to be exported to other crisis areas, and we talked a little bit about the limited success in terms of less people dying at sea in that route, but I would be interested to talk about the potential more deaths at sea in a different route opening up now in other parts, Libya specifically, and then of course in the results concretely on those refugees in Greece and how they're being treated. And again, I have my comments, but I'm more interested in yours, so I'll shut up.
Okay, let's start. Perhaps, Sarah, would you like to?
Okay, thank you very much for all the questions. Yes. Is it better? Yes? No? More? Okay. So thank you for your questions, and I will try to hopefully address most of them, but some of the questions are really broad and I think are really up for debate throughout the day. So just on the numbers, that was your precise question. I think just roughly to give you an idea, you had, just looking at my numbers again, and it's data from end of 2015 roughly, but mostly you have had 150,000 people who claimed asylum in the EU, mostly in Germany and Sweden, and I think those numbers could be roughly updated because, again, I have 6 months gap in recent data, so I'm happy if my colleagues can also update you on these numbers. But a lot of applications have been made in terms of Syrian refugees to Germany and Sweden as well. If you'd like more numbers, I can also look into further reports from Frontex, for instance, but also UNHCR has recently also, I think today or yesterday, published a global report as well with, I think, really up-to-date numbers, and also Eurostat. But I can provide you with more detail, maybe also through email. Regarding the NAVFOR-Med, you're right that it has been conceived in several steps, and fortunately, the UN Security Council has never given the legal basis to have this further interception into Libyan territorial waters. And I mean, this is it was just a remark, but then your next question was like, then what do we do with normative power Europe that has not succeeded in Europe? What is still its strength, especially I understand in the region, so vis-a-vis the rise of sectarianism in the region and this crisis, or so-called crisis of migration. And I think it's something I can relate to the other question, which was about, you know, this EU external relation or externalization approach has been there, but has not been successful to some extent. And personally, and again, we have to think about whether it's politically feasible as well, but I think you have a lot of processes which are happening transregionally. You have the Khartoum process, you have the Rabat process. Unfortunately, they have been thought through as state-to-state for us. And as we have seen from the other speakers, I mean, you do have, you know, other parties that need to sit around the table to actually find solutions as well, even when it concerns migrants and refugees, non-governmental organizations, migrants themselves. I mean, lots of different transnational actors who are not really being listened to or being heard or do not have a voice as well in the process. So I think the problem has been to think about expanding normative power Europe in a very state-to-state approach, whereas the EU has the means to also consult many other parties internally in many different policies, whether, you know, it's energy, environment. It has been good at looking at civil society and so on, but not in its external relations. And I think that's something on which we have to think what could be the incentives for member states, to go beyond. But obviously we're talking, when we speak about migration and refugees, about internal competencies which are very close to sovereignty issues of EU member states. So that's why I think we have to think also, unfortunately, with internal incentives for EU member states. And for instance, if we think about the debate on the Brexit or various, national electoral campaigns at the moment, I mean, migration is not portrayed as a positive thing in our societies, and we know it's a problem. But if we think, demographically in the future, in the next 50 years, it has to be thought through as a positive, addition to European societies. But how many political leaders are, willing to have this discourse? It's not like in the US or other countries where it's much more easy. So I think, in a way, for internal incentive, I think maybe, and we have to think, but I haven't heard a lot of, for instance, businessmen also speaking in favor, of migration coming to Europe. So maybe that could be something to be thought through. I mean, it's just one thing out of my mind, but those internal domestic challenging are constraining what the EU can do externally and its global role and its normative power or soft approach you mentioned before, which is clearly being undermined. And I think it has to be thought through, I think, transnationally, involving other type of actors. You're mentioning non-state parties as well to the crisis. I think this is definitely key, transnational approach beyond state-to-state, Khartoum process and Rabat process, which are just nice talks around the table amongst people who know very well each other. And yes, and think about how to also incentivize domestic structural issues for European public opinion. So, but I don't have a, one-size-fits-all answer to your question, and I'm sure we will debate it further.
Thank you for your comments. With regard to the migrant deal between Turkey and the EU, I think for those who are very critical of it, I think it will not be remembered in history as a big success. So in these terms, I'm not sure it's going to be a precedent. I also thought that once you close the route between Turkey and Greece, there will be other routes, but it seems that Europe is closing itself and it is becoming harder to find alternative routes. So yes, migrants will always find their way in some ways, but in other respects, Europe is closing itself, and that has repercussions. And I completely, by the way, agree with Dr. Wolf that migration has a lot of positive elements, and that the migrants that are arriving to Europe are, again, middle class, and middle class Syrians are an asset to Europe and not a strain. But unfortunately, we are in a minority approach. With regard to your excellent question about if external assistance is funding the people you want to be removed, this is a dilemma. I mean, it's a choice between alternatives, and sometimes it's between the evil and the lesser evil. The only answer to this is having more control of the funds you are channeling to the country, making sure, for example, in the case of Turkey, making sure that this money is going to education, making sure that this is going to health issues and not to the pockets of people, which is also an issue. Corruption is an issue in many places, and it's not going to political avenues you don't want the money to go. But that also creates in itself a challenge, because it makes quite a lot of tension between the country that gets the money and the donor countries. And for example, in the case of Turkey, in the beginning, it didn't want any international funding. Till 2012, excuse me, it basically said we can cope on ourselves, and we want this. Again, this is our soft power tool. We are becoming more important in the international scene, and we are donating more to international aid. And this is what we want to do. We don't want help. But at some point, they understood that they cannot do this on their own. But till now, there's a lot of friction between international NGOs, local NGOs, religious NGOs in Turkey. The government wants a lot of control. It's very, very difficult. But again, my solution is just get more control of where the funding is going to.
Okay, perhaps.
No, maybe just to give some comments Anton, right? That's their name. ICRC, we are also monitoring some of the programs called externalization or support to states who welcome migrants or are supporting migrants. In particular, we are verifying the conditions along the migratory routes and in detention, and verifying the non-refoulement aspects. And in many situations, we have seen that there were quite a number of violations of the obligation of deals that are not transparent between states, and that in the end results in refoulement actually, or by other parties. So yes, that's a comment I can make.
Okay, we are a little bit beyond the time, so thank you very much, and I will close this panel. Thank you.